Kim, what's on your radar?
Well, the Canadian government has been doing everything it can to stop and hinder the Freedom Trucker Convoy from continuing. They've been issuing $700 tickets to truckers parked downtown. They're confiscating and threatening to arrest anyone who brings supplies such as fuel to the truckers. They've declared Ottawa in a state of emergency, giving the police more power to begin towing and removing protesters. On top of it, the government has successfully pressured GoFundMe from dispersing the over $9 million remaining in the fundraised account. That's right. All of the money fundraised for the truckers will no longer be sent to them. Now, it started last week when the fundraising platform froze the funds from being withdrawn by the fundraisers' organizers. At the time, GoFundMe claimed they were only freezing the money until the organizers could submit a detailed plan of how the money, which was in the millions of dollars, would be dispersed. And that seemed somewhat satisfactory to the organizers, who insisted via social media that GoFundMe wasn't doing this politically, but logistically, and that all was well. Canadians. The organizers said they had hired an accountant and a lawyer to handle the details, and that soon enough the money would be headed into the hands of the truckers. But then a day or two later, the mayor of Ottawa, Jim Watson, took advantage of the fact the money had been frozen and announced the city was contemplating legal action against GoFundMe to secure the funds for the city instead. And speaking to Canada's CBC News, the mayor said, quote, "I think it's disgraceful that any company would want to be associated with what kind of action we've seen here in Ottawa. And, my hope is that GoFundMe understands that this is completely inappropriate use of dollars to be coming into a city to create this kind of havoc in neighborhoods, to shut down businesses, to harass our residents on the streets of Ottawa." He went on to say, "I've asked our city solicitor if we have any recourse to GoFundMe, because obviously this money is coming into the country and into our city to maintain this activity that is frustrating everyone who lives here and who works here." GoFundMe caved to the political pressure and threats of legal action and announced they would no longer be dispersing the money to the truckers, that instead the money would be rerouted to approved charities. Mayor Jim Watson thanked the platform on Twitter, saying, "I want to sincerely thank the team at GoFundMe for listening to the plea made by the city and the Ottawa police to no longer provide funds to the convoy organizers. In light of the unlawful behavior that has transpired in the last few days, they have come to the right decision in support of our city and our residents. These protesters have been holding our city hostage for a week now, and I'm hopeful that limiting their access to funding and resources will restrict their ability to remain in Ottawa. I'm imploring similar crowdfunding platforms to take the same position and not enable the group in its fundraising efforts, which would deal a blow to our efforts to put an end to this occupation." Now, this announcement set off a firestorm of well-deserved backlash. Many critics, including myself, felt this was pure theft. People don't give money to GoFundMe. People give money to others through GoFundMe. For the platform to then take the money given and reroute it to someone other than intended is theft. There's no other way to put it. The backlash grew louder, so the platform then announced they would offer refunds for people if they jump through the hoop of filling out a form, and the charities could be chosen by the trucker convoy organizers. Not good enough, GoFundMe. Luckily, several states' attorneys generals agreed and threatened to file lawsuits on behalf of the donors. Now GoFundMe says they will automatically issue refunds to anyone who donated, something they should have done right from the beginning. Just so you know, had GoFundMe been allowed to reroute the money, they would have been able to keep their 3% fee, which is perhaps the reason why they didn't offer refunds automatically. That 3% fee on the $9 million confiscated is about $270,000. It's probably also why they were initially only offering refunds only if a form was filled out. They were banking on a good portion of people not knowing about it and not doing it, thus allowing them to reroute the money and still keep a portion for themselves. Extremely shady stuff. So maybe you're thinking, yeah, well, what the truckers are doing is an occupation of downtown Ottawa. And if that's against GoFundMe's terms of service, then so be it. They're a private company and they could do whatever they want. Unlike the autonomous Chaz zone set up in downtown Seattle, the Freedom Trucker Convoy is not declaring itself its own police-free, government-free nation. Yet when an actual occupation was happening, GoFundMe not only allowed the funds to be dispersed to the occupiers, but also championed it. We all remember when the protests in the summer of 2020 were deemed as mostly peaceful, despite buildings being smashed to pieces and some burned to the ground. People were actually killed during those protests, yet they were still championed by the liberal news media and even governments as summer of love and nothing to fear. Armed looters literally hit out in my building, causing us residents to go into lockdown while SWAT teams and helicopters swarmed the place. We lived through that, and yet they continued to gaslight us by telling us these Canadians are separatists, white supremacists, science deniers who are violent and forcing residents to live in terror. And we see the videos coming from the protests in Ottawa, and it looks just like a bunch of dancing, singing, flag-waving Canadians. I mean, where are the burning buildings? Where are the smash and grabs? Where are the bloody brawls? But once again, we're told this other thing is happening that we can't see any verifiable evidence of. And on top of this, it's important to remember the reason for this protest is because the government insists that if the truckers are vaccinated, the virus won't spread. This is the reason for the mandate. Justin Trudeau insists these protesters are dangerous science deniers, while he himself, triple vaxxed, is sick with COVID. How gullible do they think we are? The truckers aren't going down without a fight. The Convoy has set up another fundraising account with Give, Send, Go, which has now amassed over $4 million in donations. Rebel News, which has been doing an excellent job of on-the-ground coverage of the protest, has set up a legal defense team that will handle and pay for any of the tickets that are being issued to the truckers and protesters. Some reports are that the convoy is dispersing and there are a few trucks left, but during the week there were fewer protesters, but they multiplied during the weekend. So this could turn into something similar to the yellow vests in France, where people go home and go to work during the week and then come out and protest during the weekends. The Freedom Convoy is also spreading. Reports are that the protests can be seen in every provincial capital across Canada, and they claim this is fringe. Now, trouble could be headed to D.C., as reports are that a convoy is forming with the intent to head to the nation's capital to pressure Biden into dropping the mandates. The organized effort by U.S. truckers is meant to mimic the Canadian convoy and drive from California to D.C. But, of course, Facebook shut down the organizers' page. There's nothing like big tech colluding with the government to censor and silence working-class protesters. Now, one last point I want to make before wrapping this up. People say they've seen Nazi flags or other displays of bigotry at these trucker protests, and so this confirms they're not actually working-class protests, but fascists instead. But make no mistake, this protest and other anti-mandate protests like it bring people together from all sides of the political spectrum. Many of these people disagree on everything else politically, but they've come together to protest this one thing they agree on. Trying to say these are anything other than what they actually are is a deflection from addressing the issue. So rather than just dismissing protests because you don't like the people in them, give reasons why you think they're wrong. Argue your point. So this is really amazing to me that the mayor of Ottawa, Ryan and Robbie, the mayor of Ottawa is saying, oh, thanks to GoFundMe, and hopefully other platforms will do the same thing as you, as if they didn't pressure GoFundMe into doing this, as if they didn't threaten legal action. They're acting like GoFundMe just has its own moral principles to not allow funds to go to these, occupations. And the same thing with the Facebook group being shut down. It's being applauded like Facebook made this decision, like Facebook's got this moral code in terms of service and these people were breaking it, when in reality, this is government pressure to silence and stop protests on these big tech organizations and on these platforms such as GoFundMe.
Yeah, absolutely. Although it sounds like what GoFundMe is doing potentially sounds a bit fraudulent. Maybe they have something in their terms that gets them out of that. Like there's, some buried text that actually, if you give us this money, we can do whatever we want with it, like to keep them out of legal liability, something like that. But yeah, I agree with you. The government should not put pressure, and at least in the U.S., I think we're starting to run up against the First Amendment with the amount of pressure the government is putting on companies, to big tech companies, to silence specific people. Obviously, that violates the First Amendment. They can't do that. Now, in Canada, obviously, the law is not so clear. There isn't as much protection for private entities from the government. So I don't know. But in either case, it's morally reprehensible to do that.
And the left should seriously worry about what the implications would be if they successfully create some type of policy that is in place that bars people from funding anybody who's associated with some type of crime. Because, if you retcon it back to summer of 2020, certainly all the bail funds and anything else that could be remotely associated with any event that is associated with looting, even if the people that you're organizing a GoFundMe for didn't have anything to do with looting and were out there just protesting, they could be lumped in with that, and GoFundMe could say, you know what, we're just doing uninsured people who need who need surgery. Like that's all we're going to do.
Right.
And that person needs to pass a background check to make sure that they're worthy of getting that surgery. But once you put political guardrails around that, it's very unlikely that it's only going to apply to your political enemies, and people should remember that.
Yeah, I mean, right now, I think a lot of people, particularly on the left, are they're not realizing this is because with BLM, those protests were championed, those protests were propped up, they were looked at as a moral good thing, and so they weren't held to really the same recourse that's happening right now against truckers and any other sort of anti-mandate or anti-mask protest or whatnot. But that is so dangerous to say, well, as long as I participate in a government-approved protest, then I'm fine, right? Like, as long as the government says this is a good one,
or corporate America,
the point of right, exactly. I mean, the point of protesting is to go against these entities that are bigger than you, and the people amassing together to say, no, we the people are speaking up. We the people are saying we're not okay with this. And if we can't, as the people, rise up against government, rise up against big corporations, and it has to be sanctioned and approved by them, we have lost our right to protest at that point. And this is the path they're paving for us, is to lose our right to protest.
Yeah.
But they're doing it in these interesting little ways. Big tech says you're not allowed to. Big tech is going to shut down your ability to organize.
And you are so right to bring up it's just so lame. It infuriates me, actually, when they're like, oh, well, this whole protest should be discredited because, well, look, wasn't that a Nazi flag or something? Then half the time we find out that's not even a photo of the thing, or it's something else, or it's blurry, or it's not actually what they're talking about. But who cares? Like, every protest, right, left, whatever, attracts some element of kooky people, show up to things. Like, if you have to vouch for that everyone at a protest for a cause has always at all times conducted and comported themselves perfectly and not done anything crazy and then didn't have any crazy sign or so, then no protest on earth clears that threshold. So it's so right now, if it's lots of Nazi flags, if it's a significant element of the protest, then yes, criticize it. But one-off things like this are so stupid and so lame. I hate when the right does it to the left does it to the right too. Don't do it.
Well, I mean, look, if it was an anti-immigration protest and you saw a bunch of Nazi flags or something, that's one thing, right? But this is, they're protesting something very specific. They're protesting against mandates. But if it's that easy to discredit a protest, then any protest you don't like, you're just going to send somebody with a Nazi flag to show up. And then, whoop, there you go. You don't even pay attention to that protest anymore.
That's where the false flag terminology comes from, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
All right, well, thank you, Kim. We'll be back with more Rising in just a minute.